Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I'm a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have my good friend and fellow hacker, Alex, on to help us go through the InfoSec news of the week. Alex, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
So there has been a lot that's happened over the last week, and we're going to go ahead and start out with an interesting piece of malware that, we're going to go to the worst story of the week. I'm just going to jump straight to that because I think that we might as well get that out of the way. And a lot of people were talking about this article on Vice kind of leads the reader to believe that the Defcon hacking convention is like fueling conspiracy theories about how it's possible to hack elections. And I agree with the take on this, that this is like not really a valid take on either election security or a hacker convention. Reading through this, it seems like the person who wrote this was just kind of spooked by people saying, well, no system is 100% secure, and then think that that reality is in some way allowing a bunch of people to continue to believe that the election was hacked. Now, of course, like, knowing that there are problems with things doesn't mean that those problems are actually happening. It just means that there are potential problems under certain circumstances that can happen. And this article really kind of makes the case that the Defcon ethical, as they put it in quotes, hacking conference is really kind of like fueling the speculation around this by being irresponsible with the way that they do research. Which, like, yeah, of course, if nobody knew there were problems, then everyone would have more confidence in it, but that confidence would be misplaced. So, you know, I don't know. I really don't like this article because in general, it makes the hacker community look like by doing our jobs, we're putting people in danger by casting doubt on institutions, which actually do have real flaws. The problem here is context. A lot of these flaws are only exploitable under certain circumstances and leave evidence, which has not been seen. So, you know, while it's important that we know that there are flaws in these devices that we use and that have critical functions in our society, just looking into them and finding, you know, flaws that need to be fixed doesn't constitute fueling the fire of conspiracy theorists. The problem is conspiracy theorists don't really care about nuance, so they're willing to latch on to, you know, little bits of this research and use it as validation for completely wrong assertions. So, you know, I don't know. This doesn't seem like a very good take when it comes to the way that the security community contributes and then the effect it has on, you know, the rest of everyone else. Because really, we're able to rule out most of these things that the conspiracy theorists are saying could have happened. So just latching on to the little parts that might validate one part of their elaborate web of conspiracies isn't really contributing to the problem, in my opinion. And in fact, like, making sure that we put those vulnerabilities into perspective is exactly why hacking conferences like DEF CON are important. So
I think this is ridiculously blown out of proportion. I guess it could be applied to like any technology. Like, ooh, car hackers at DEF CON are like undermining the security of like modern car applications.
And making passengers less safe. It's just like, well, someone's going to find these, or the programs are just going to crash themselves. Like, a lot of the times these are just bugs that can be exploited, but also just happen randomly sometimes. So yeah, like, you're exactly right. Like saying that hackers are like casting doubt on, like, you know, cars by hacking cars, or elections by hacking the voting machines at elections. Yeah, it's just like, it doesn't really add up here. And like, it just kind of, this is why when I went to DEF CON with like a press badge, like, people ignored me. And like, after a while, I just stopped getting one because sometimes people go to hacking conferences like already knowing what kind of story they're gonna write. And then when they leave, they cast every interaction they have there in like a spooky or like negative context, which is why the ethical quotes is like kind of funny on this one. So Vice does a pretty good job of covering cybersecurity sometimes, but like, I don't think so this time. Anyway, let's move on. All right, Alex, you got something this week?
Sure. This one is about a NetUSB bug. So if you don't know what NetUSB is, it's basically a piece of software that lets you mount a USB drive to your router or printer or something like that, and just be able to directly access it over your local network.
So it's like a stupid, simple way of making like a NAT server.
Yeah, basically. But there was a bug that was uncovered in NetUSB, something having to do with memory allocation, where there's an integer overflow that happens when interacting with one of the pieces of software that works with NetUSB. And if an attacker is able to trigger this integer overflow, they can execute arbitrary code on your router. So that's obviously pretty bad. You can probably do stuff like, I guess, DHCP poisoning, have the router like log traffic or stuff like that. There's a lot of possibilities with RCE. if that's enabled on your router.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
does anything need to be plugged into it, or is it just like if it's...
It's specific devices that are
Okay.
using like some version of NetUSB. So you can see here some of the routers that are affected, router models that are affected by this
Spooky.
firmware. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a convenient way of just like attaching a device and having it available on your local network, but
But yeah, it
seems
also
like maybe
opens
not.
up the possibility for attackers to run random stuff on your network.
Interesting. All right, so over on my screen, there is a couple interesting aspects to this attack that is, how do I pronounce this? Magniber? Magniber?
Magniber.
Yeah, Magniber. There you go. So this is a piece of ransomware that's using validly signed malware, basically, to infect systems. And what's interesting about this is how clunky the attack here is. So you get a phishing link, and then something pops up that says, hey, you need to manually update Edge or whatever browser that you're using. And first of all, like, that's very sketchy because that is not how browsers update. But it drops, and then when you click on it, normally some sort of like Windows Defender or whatever would tell you, hey, like this is a piece of malware. But because it's validly signed and it's just the beginning stage of the malware, it actually will accept this. So it's unusual that, you know, malware will have a validly signed digital certificate, and usually, of course, that will get revoked pretty quickly. So just noticing this extra feature that makes this kind of terribly executed ransomware able to install a little bit more easily is probably the reason why anybody has been infected by it at all, because you really have to not know very much about computers or how like browsers update in order to get fooled into just clicking on a link and then, you know, letting whatever drops down install. So, you know, like this one is notable in that it's trying to like sidestep some of the methods of detection by using the certificate and a very minimal install footprint so that it can pull down more malware immediately after. But the execution method, not very sophisticated on this one, kind of interesting to see. So another piece of news that I would say Vice actually got right is covering the FBI's infiltration of this cryptographically secure phone company where they sent out a bunch of Anom? Yeah. Phones that had been deliberately infected with backdoors. And this was a company that was doing business by advertising, you know, secure, encrypted this and that, and then charging pretty high prices, which kind of makes it clear, like, this is sort of targeted at like criminals that are making a bunch of money and like are paranoid and want to hide what they're doing. So the FBI got really curious about all the customers of this particular brand and decided to intercept phones and then ship out ones that had been backdoored. So apparently, we knew that this had happened, but we didn't really know how many of these phones had been shipped out. Apparently it was bigger than people initially thought, and there were actually over 100 different phones that were shipped out to customers in the United States that the FBI deemed maybe interesting to do surveillance on. So this is pretty astounding because this was a company that was marketing itself kind of towards criminals or people that wanted to hide what they were doing. And that made those people very interesting to the FBI. So by going the extra step of intercepting these phones and deliberately crippling the encryption that's built into them, it was pretty interesting to see that the FBI adopted this as a very aggressive tactic to go after people with secrets that they were trying to hide using these phones. So it's not clear how many of these phones actually went to people who were committing crimes. They could have just gone to very paranoid people or VIPs or other people with money and reasons to be paranoid. But yeah, it's interesting to see this kind of more scaled up effort to defeat these ways that criminals try to use encryption to get around modern methods of surveillance. So it doesn't really work if the device is intercepted on its way to you and installed with some sort of backdoored firmware. Because there's lots of different ways that have been found to make this sort of malware or spyware persistent in memory areas the consumer doesn't really have access to, so it can come back even if it's been erased. There's ways of doing this that would make it very difficult to get this off of a phone once it's been intercepted. So something to note if you are buying secure cell phones on the internet with the intent of keeping your stuff private.
Dang, we've seen this with like secure messaging apps or stuff like that were like targeted towards people doing like sketchy stuff, but this is pretty high level stuff if they're like backdooring entire phones.
Yeah, and physically intercepting them before they're shipped out. So this was definitely like a honeypot scheme where they were anticipating criminals would be really interested in this and marketing it in that fashion. And then when criminals showed up to buy them, they delivered the goods, but with a special backdoor feature so the FBI could keep tabs on them.
Dang.
Pretty crazy. All right, what do you got?
This one is a new Golang-based ransomware. So Go is a cross-platform language that seems to, it's becoming a lot more popular for the reason that it is cross-platform and also really easy to develop in. So basically, this is a TellYouThePass-based ransomware that works on different operating systems like Linux and Windows with very little altercation to how the code actually works.
So that's like significant because usually like malware will run and then it has to determine like what operating system it's on, and like depending on whether it's Windows or macOS or Linux, like that can completely change what it has to do in order to accomplish the same goals, because those systems are so different that it's very rare that one piece of malware can run on all of them. So usually the malware will just like kill itself if it's like on the wrong piece of infrastructure. It's just like, I can't do anything with this, and it just won't infect because it knows that there's no viable way to do it. By using this, it kind of means that like suddenly the same piece of malware is viable across lots of different platforms with very little modification, which makes it way easier for malware authors to use the same tools over and over again.
Yeah, and you can see there's this visualization tool that shows you like some of the functions that are running within this malware, and it seems to be pretty much the same across the board. So it works on multiple operating systems. But some stuff it does, it encrypts various files, and it even obfuscates itself by randomizing the names of functions that are running within this malware to avoid detection. So I found that really interesting about this. So it's kind of a dynamic payload.
Some of the like indicators of compromise then that people look for, like file names and stuff like that, or like variable names inside the code, like just won't be there if it's kind of introducing random mutations each time.
Yeah, I think it also said it wasn't able to be detected by VirusTotal or something like that, just because of how this code was written. But yeah.
Interesting. Yeah,
oh, wait.
That's really cool.
Also, what's interesting about it is it utilizes the recent well, I guess not recent anymore, but relatively recent Log4Shell exploit in order to, Log4Shell vulnerability rather, to exploit vulnerable machines.
All right, so over on my screen, we have an announcement which I am kind of happy about because I still have to do a bunch of slides. So I'm going to be presenting at the RSA conference, but I was seriously thinking about not going because of the ongoing Omicron spike. But it looks like that decision has been made for me. So instead, the RSA conference is going to be moving from February to June, which means hopefully things will be more under control. So I'm not going to be doing a talk until then. So if you're looking forward to my talk on producing viral videos and how to get people involved with cybersecurity through media, then unfortunately you'll have to wait a little bit. But again, I am totally fine with that. I am not looking to travel right now, and I would love some more time to work on my talk. So I'm not too worried about it.
Procrastination seems to be our theme here.
Yeah, exactly. Like just making the decision to make the decision later. So, okay, this is an interesting article about FinalSite. So FinalSite was a educationally focused website provider that is trying to provide different school districts with a website and simplify everything so that it has all the critical things that like a school district would need. They're just kind of like Squarespace or whatever, but for schools very specifically. So what happened here was they were attacked by ransomware, and lots of different school district websites went down. But the concern here was like these people were hosting lots and lots of data for students, you know, like, or people who were involved with the school district, employees. So it's not really understood. Like, obviously, the hackers were able to access the data because they were able to encrypt it. So that's problematic. And there's a lot of different ransomware groups that will do double exploitation. Do you remember what that is?
Yeah, it's where they first off encrypt your data, but then also save it to like leak it or stuff like that.
Exactly. So like a lot of these school districts, for example, it would be really terrible for you know, all of their employees and all their students' data to just be leaked to the internet. If you could just see like every like second grader's like grades, like first of all, like who cares? But second, like that would be pretty embarrassing if you're doing bad in like, I don't know, math. So what was the concern here was trying to figure out whether or not the data was uploaded before it was encrypted. And right now the indications are that there wasn't any data stolen, but some of the things that they used as reasons why they were pretty sure about that were just like, yeah, because we haven't seen it leaked. So like, I mean, maybe just wait a while, who knows? But this is just a reminder that, you know, some of these like infrastructure businesses that are like service-based, providing for large groups of school districts or other sorts of important industries that have data that's really, really important. I mean, this could have also been a provider that does the same thing for like hospitals, and they would have had the exact same concerns, like was our patient's data accessed and, you know, what happened to it? So in this case, it looks like so far they're saying that it hasn't been, but obviously this is a huge concern whenever there's a ransomware attack on a service provider that primarily focuses on something pretty sensitive like this. All right, so then also, this is just like a little point of, I guess, revenge, but it feels good. So the semiconductor shortage has been ongoing and made it really difficult for companies who rely on little bits of, like PCBs or other things to be able to do what they need to do as certain parts go out of stock with delivery times all the way up to 2027. So Canon usually puts like a little device inside their ink printer cartridges that allow them to identify them as genuine Canon devices. And this is very annoying because if you try to buy an off-brand replacement, your Canon device will reject it unless you do some fiddling to get around that. Well, the semiconductor shortage has come full circle and now made it so Canon hasn't been able to get that part that makes their Canon genuine replacement cartridges. So now even when you buy one, you have to follow their specific instructions for how to get around the genuine check, which means one could accidentally maybe follow those exact same instructions into using any third-party ink cartridge, as many have tried to do. So I'm not going to say that that's funny, but that's pretty great.
I certainly find it ironic.
Yeah, definitely. So if you have Canon printers at home and you've been holding off on buying ink for them, now might be your golden moment, thanks to a worldwide semiconductor shortage.
Nice.
Okay, so also if you have a QNAP NAS server, which is network attached storage, these are really popular. Right now they're offering guidance to basically just unplug it. They're just like don't maybe have this connected to the internet right now. Their instructions for remediation are basically get this thing off the network now. So the severity here, where is it? It seemed like fairly severe if this is being hit by ransomware. So the instructions are basically how to not port forward and tells you to try to remove the settings in your router that are directly exposing this to the internet, which basically just means they quarantine this from the network, do not make it discoverable by Shodan, otherwise this might get hit. QNAP Crypt is also the nickname for this ransomware. Which is not good if you are a QNAP customer. So just another example of kind of vague instructions by the vendor who are just like, please disable port forwarding and disable the UPnP function of the QNAP NAS. So yank it off the internet and then kill the service after that. So this seems pretty urgent, and they're not really saying what the vulnerability that's being exploited here it really is. They're just saying that you need to immediately unplug this from the internet and make sure it's not discoverable. So if you enjoyed the ability to use this product outside of your home, you might need to have like a VPN or something else that allows you to tunnel back into your local network and then use that instead, because it does not seem like it is a good time to leave your QNAP open and flapping out on the internet because it's going to get encrypted.
Dang.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of things that shouldn't be on the internet, have you ever had an electric blanket that could also participate in a distributed denial of service attack?
Hey, nice.
Because it now offers that. So there's so many of these little IoT devices that are out there. I had just never seen like an electric blanket that connected to one.
IoT functionality on your electric blanket.
So you can use an app to control it. So you can like put it up, if you're like just like passed out on it and you just don't want to move, you can just roll over and just like bring your phone up a little bit and it'll make it warmer.
If you're too lazy to like press all of 6 buttons that are on here, that
yeah,
can also
exactly.
do the same thing. Nice.
Or maybe the buttons are sticky. Like who knows? Like you don't want to touch them. But yeah, the use case here is not really much, but it's exactly things like this that enable botnets that use these devices' ability to send traffic and route traffic over the internet to orchestrate massive attacks. So just a fun little reminder as to where these botnets come from. It's from ideas like this.
A literal piece of hot garbage.
A literal, hey, yeah, well, yes, a convenient piece of hot garbage. So we've talked in the past about a hacking group called MuddyWater, and they have a couple other names which are fanciful as various analysts like to assign to them, but this has been now positively attributed to the Iranian intelligence agency. So there have been a number of different attacks. Oh yes, aka Seed Worm and Temp.Zargos. This group was first spotted around 2017 and has been targeting primarily the Middle East. They like to look at critical infrastructure, especially oil infrastructure, and they've been known to also attack European and United States targets, or Northern American targets, like Canada, the United States, I guess would be the two in North America. But anyway, also Mexico. I'm so sorry, Mexico. Yeah, so this is one of the first positive attributions of this group. Before, it wasn't positively identified who in the Iranian apparatus was operating this group, although they had been attributed to Iran. So just an interesting little piece of nation-state hacking InfoSec drama. Anytime one of these groups gets unmasked, it's always interesting to see because they've often been tracked for quite some time, and their actions might be designed to create some confusion about who's behind it. But once there's positive attribution, it can mean a lot more context to some of these attacks that were earlier reported, but maybe not previously very well understood. All right, I'm going to do one more. So there are a lot of different devices that are set up to be able to be accessed from anywhere, which means at some point, the device is going to use a connection to either back itself up or be able to update itself. And in this case, it looks like there was a certain brand of Dashcams that can just be accessed in real time anytime that they are connected to a persistent data source. So these are some examples of just being able to like see a car that is internet connected and just look through its Dashcam. And I've actually done this. So one time I was waiting, I think, in an In-N-Out, and I was on my phone looking at nearby Wi-Fi networks, and I noticed a soft access point that was being like set up by a device that said something cam. And I was like, I wonder what this is. So I logged in, I scanned it, I saw an open port for a web interface. I accessed it, and I could see through the dash cam like at the restaurant I was sitting at. And it was like, oh, it's that car right there. So this is a real thing. Like, and sometimes you need local access in order to exploit this. But if the cam is actually set up to join your home network when you get home, for example, or if it's designed to piggyback off of your phone, then it can make it possible to basically stream these dash cams from anywhere, which is probably not what people intended when they installed it.
Can you just look at arbitrary cameras or like ones that you specifically know, like
arbitrary cameras?
Oh, spooky.
Yeah, like once you guess the ID, you can just get access to it.
I wonder how many of these are profiled by like Shodan or something.
Probably a lot.
Nice.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's why I don't have one. At least one that's like internet
Wi-Fi connected.
Yeah. All right, what do you got?
Cool. So this was a bug that was discovered by Microsoft in macOS. So there's a vulnerability in a system called TCC, which is used to basically just like isolate sensitive data and like limit what apps are able to, like what level of interaction apps are able to have with the operating system. But there's basically a vulnerability where you can create like a fake home directory on macOS, and then TCC will automatically like create a new environment in this home system that then you can use maliciously crafted apps to then like log information about information coming in from other apps like camera, microphone, or stuff like that. And I think you can see they tested it out with Microsoft Teams or some other application like that. But yeah, definitely pretty spooky.
Always funny also when Microsoft finds a vulnerability in macOS.
Yeah.
Like, because like, I don't know, it's just funny that they have a team that's like working on that all the time. So yeah, interesting vulnerability. And this has been in the news because it was pretty significant when they released it.
Yeah.
Cool. So over on my screen, we have a story about a big pervert getting caught.
Oh.
That's the headline.
Nice.
Yeah. So this guy was imprisoned for, for almost 2 years, or how many? For many months, because he catfished a bunch of people and sent them phishing links that allowed him to access their devices, and then ransack through the devices for naughty photos, and would basically create like giant catalogs of people's raunchy photos. Yeah, he was also getting away with this at a certain point because the victims had very little recourse to understand what was going on. And he was even accessing their webcams and using that to gather more sketchy photos and videos for some of these victims. And some of these were also underage, which led to even more charges, I imagine, when he was caught. So the way that this guy slipped up was he was looking for better tools to hack his victims. And he participated in an online forum for buying like cyber hacking tools, specifically targeted at backdooring devices. And unfortunately for him, the police were running this website. So they were just like, hey, why does this guy need so many different hacking tools? So this was for being a WeLeak Info customer. So the moral of the story here is if you're paying for like hacking tools with like your credit card or whatever, or with like easily traceable like Bitcoin or something like that, like people are probably going to wonder like why you have so much money to front into offensive hacking tools that are frequently designed to target individuals. If you're like buying a bunch of weapons, people might want to know what you're using them for. So this guy was caught with tons of just like sketchy stuff that he was gathering on his victims. And because of that, he's going to be serving like 2 years of prison. But that is actually a great ending because he did it. So, 26 months in prison, but for spying on 30 people. So that's like less than like a month per person he spied on and stole sketchy photos of. I
think that warrants a lot more prison time.
He's
also an aggressive pervert. He's like installing whole remote administration tools.
Exactly.
We have an advanced pervert threat.
Yeah, a very yeah. As Alex said, this is the new meaning of the word APT, because this advanced pervert threat was spying on lots of people, and obviously when you have these sorts of skills, or you have the money to just buy software that makes it easier for you to do this sort of thing, it's a big argument for why some of these vulnerabilities that exist on people's devices, when they're found and they're not fixed, they trickle down into these marketplaces where people who have all sorts of sketchy, selfish, weird, gross agendas can purchase them as malware packages or targeted packages towards breaking into someone's device and rustling around at it and trying to persistently find photos. Yeah, photos or access the webcam. So all this stuff, like for me anyway, just shows how like selling these exploits and enabling like stalkerware and spyware really sucks. It's definitely the dark side of the hacking community, is people who write this sort of stuff and sell this sort of stuff, which then goes on to be used by people like this who might not really have the skills to do it themselves. But if you write it for them and tell them how to use it, can still do some pretty horrific and pretty gross stuff. And then get caught for their dependency on other people. I mean, if this guy could write his own software, he probably wouldn't have gotten caught, at least for a while. So there's a whole level of cyber criminal that are enabled by people who don't care who buys their stuff, provided they get paid. And this is kind of the fallout from that. All right, next up, some hackers presumably from the North Korean government, decided to try to email a bunch of Russian diplomats a Happy New Year email that pretty obviously had malware in it. Now, the funny thing here is that this malware was disguising itself as a New Year's screensaver. And I think the funniest thing about North Korean hackers is that like they assume the rest of the world is stuck in 1995.
You can make
because
like MS Paint.
Literally, I don't even have a screensaver that I am aware of. The screen just turns off when I'm not using it. So like the fact that somebody would download and install like a screensaver, perhaps like the diplomats for Russia are just very old and are very particular about their screensavers. And that's just a little detail I don't know. Maybe screensavers are all the rage over there. And, it's a very hot ticket to download a New Year's screensaver. But it was interesting to see this email go out that just was like, enjoy this New Year's screensaver, which as soon as they open the newyear.scr, it will immediately go and infect the system with a bat.
Yes.
And it opens an image that just says happy.jpg. So this is like
juvenile.
This is like not very sophisticated malware. But I mean, if it actually infected anyone, I would be really impressed, because maybe, just maybe, again, I don't know, that amongst Russian diplomats, like their favorite thing is installing random screensavers. They just email each other in a zip file. So, I mean, and like packing it in a zip file is also like a pretty funny way of like trying to hide this. The other thing that was notable about this campaign is they hid some of their payloads in a 401 unauthorized server error response. So if you just try to access it, you would get a 401. And if you didn't check the rest of the payload, you would probably miss the encoded payload that came back with it. So, I mean, there are some elements of obfuscation and trying to make this sneaky, but again, the attack vector here of just like getting access to like a Russian diplomat's email and then using it to just blast out this fake screensaver is pretty funny. The malware that it drops is pretty nasty, but the actual method of intrusion is, in this case, not very sophisticated and requires a good amount of interaction from an inexperienced user in order to work. Okay, so another piece of news that's making the rounds is that Moxie Marlinspike is no longer the CEO of Signal. So most of my team uses Signal, and we've been appraised of some of the weird stuff they've been doing lately around crypto, which cryptography people don't really like because they believe that crypto means cryptography, whereas it seems like some of the people at Signal may no longer agree. The new CEO of Signal is Brian Acton, who I do not know a lot about, but I do know that Eva at the EFF has a pretty good judge of character when it comes to like leaders of these sorts of organizations. So if she's comfortable with this pick, then they generally probably seem to have user privacy and user trust in mind, because that's a big thing that she and the EFF advocate for. So this seems like mostly a positive transition, but it'll be interesting to see how the company grows and evolves as it has new leadership. Okay, so this is a somewhat interesting use of the Log4j attack vector. So there's been lots of different groups who have been trying to use this attack vector recently. And one that's kind of notable is state actors. Like obviously state actors have a lot more resources than the average like criminal group. So looking at the kinds of things that they're using is an interesting way of seeing what the most efficient way of leveraging some of these attacks are. So the modular attack that's being used here allows you to do a lot of different things with PowerShell. And somebody was just asking me on our Q&A stream whether I hated PowerShell. And really, aside from it just being hard to remember, it's an incredibly versatile tool that allows you to do a lot. And that is demonstrated here by the PowerShell module fetching the Charm Power module that was delivered from Amazon S3 bucket. So if they're able to take over or add to an existing Amazon bucket, they can host their malware and basically hide the best parts of it behind some pretty easy to execute PowerShell commands that, provided the device that they're running this exploit on has PowerShell, means that this should work across any Windows device with PowerShell enabled, which is a lot of Windows devices. So that's why living off the land is a big part of the way that state actors conduct their business, because by stringing together these tools that already exist on a platform that they're attacking, they don't need to bring in their own malware until the last possible second, making it a lot more difficult to attribute who is running this attack, especially if it's not successful or if it has enough checks in it to make sure it's difficult to reverse engineer. And one thing that I noted this month is that the Pentagon has taken a big role in making sure that their networks are clear of Log4j threats. So they've had really good results opening up their networks to pen testing in the past and opening bug bounty programs to anybody who's able to identify flaws. And they did that in a big way for the Log4j vulnerability that basically is opening a lot of Pentagon sites open to the ethical hacking community in exchange for some pretty sweet payouts. So if you're a bug bounty person that has been focusing on Log4j, you might want to check out the Pentagon, because they've got lots and lots of stuff there that needs to be checked for some of these vulnerabilities, especially the stuff that's publicly accessible and findable on Shodan. All right, Alex, you got another one?
Sure. Related to Log4j, so we have some more news on the Night Sky Ransomware, or ransomware gang that's exploiting the Log4j vulnerability across VMware servers. I think we actually talked about VMware being exploited before. It seems like a lot of systems that are using VMware are vulnerable to this. But you can see they're mostly targeting enterprise networks. There's a lot of encrypted victims, and they're asking for a pretty huge ransom from $800,000 from various groups that have been affected by this.
All right, so over on my screen, I learned about something that I did not know about. Did you know that Firefox has a stripped down version of their browser, specifically for mobile, that is designed to eliminate a lot of the ad tracking and abilities that advertisers have or big platforms have to track you across the internet? So this is called Firefox Focus. And again, I had never heard of this, But one of the things that they do that's really cool is they prevent different websites from dropping cookies into the same jar, as it were, so that a website like Facebook or a platform like Facebook can persistently track you all the way across the internet and tie together data about you. Instead, it makes you look like a unique device or a different device to each cookie that's given to you, which means that a website later can't try to rummage around and find cookies for Facebook that were set by a different device, thus tying you together. So some of the privacy features built into this seem actually really cool and interesting. And I was actually just, surprised I didn't know about this project because I like privacy and I use Firefox on my phone, so I'm probably going to check it out now. So if you haven't seen it, then Firefox Focus seems like an interesting way of upgrading your privacy abilities on just casual browsing on Android. So it's not going through Tor or anything crazy, but it is enabling some technology that specifically blocks some of the most common tools that advertising trackers will use to track you.
It's cool to have that on the phone now, because I know there's browser extensions like one I use where you can do the same thing and virtualize different environments for different websites, so they're not all accessing the same pot of data. But one problem that I have with mobile web browsers is you can't really use extensions like that or things like AdBlock. But
exactly.
Yeah,
so
really cool.
Rolling some of the things that people like best about extensions into a privacy-focused, stripped-down version of Firefox. So if you think that macOS doesn't get malware, then you're probably not following Objective-C, run by our friend Patrick Wardle, who has found another vulnerability, well, in this case, a piece of malware leveraging a vulnerability that is a persistent backdoor. So I love Patrick's write-ups. This one is called SysJoker, and if you're interested in the way that macOS malware works, Patrick is an ex-NSA researcher that really knows how to present these in plain English that anybody can follow and understand. You can see his write-up here shows an initial detection of 0 with virus total, taking a look at the delivery method, which is a MPEG, right, okay, a .ts file, okay. And then the whole breakdown of what's happening here. Now, Patrick offers on the Objective-C website a variety of different tools that allow you to detect this natively, which is really cool because on my macOS system, I have some of Patrick's tools, like this one right here and this one right here, that would actually catch this malware as it was executing on my computer, which is pretty cool and funny. And that's really the goal of a lot of these tools that Patrick puts out, is to analyze the different behaviors that malware would need to do in order to be successful. And here's an example of this tool right here. I have BlockBlock installed. So I would see that something was attempting to install a launch agent. And this is something that not a lot of programs do. So when it happens, it's definitely worth noting whether or not you trust this. And in this case, I would be like, no, and I would block it and the malware wouldn't be able to run. But you can also see along this kind of chain of events, I also have Lulu, which is a network monitor that tells me when a program is attempting to establish a new connection. And something that malware has to do is phone home in order to get instructions or more payloads, or to exfiltrate your data. And being able to identify something suspicious connecting back to a malware server is exactly how you're able to natively detect this sort of thing. So in this case, I can see that some sketchy process is now attempting to connect to just a raw IP address, which is very unusual. That would tell me that perhaps I should block this. And also I can run virus total and look at the ancestry of this task in order to identify where it came from. So this is how people analyze macOS malware. First, by detecting it using these tools, and then by stepping through it and seeing exactly what's happening. And looking at the way that they're doing encoding and some of these other things is a great way of walking through a real attack against a macOS system and how all the different pieces work. So if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a little specific to macOS, but Patrick breaks down all the different ways they tried to hide what they did and were trying to be sneaky. And it's really funny to just watch him laugh at them do a bad job of it sometimes, because he has a great sense of humor.
I was actually just looking at a news piece on it. I didn't read too deep into it, but it seems like the SysJoker malware is cross-platform, although they have different versions written for each platform. I just found it really funny that they're using Google Drive as the way to exfiltrate their data.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and then in order to get C2 commands or see which servers they need to communicate with in order to exfiltrate or pull in new commands, they just have a text file on there with a list of servers to communicate to.
That's great.
I thought that was funny.
Oh yeah, and they just update the text file in order to get people to.
Yeah, it's literally domains.txt.
That's great. Yeah, so this is Yeah, it's interesting that these cross-platform pieces of malware, are able to be analyzed so effectively on macOS and detected, because it's weird that Windows doesn't have, or Linux doesn't have any built-in protections like this. So it's like, hey, a program is installing a launch agent. Like, do you want that? Or like, hey, a program is trying to connect to a raw IP address. Do you recognize this process? It's never called anyone before now. It's just like things that I wish were built into every system. All right, so there was also an alert sent out to federal agencies that was talking about some of these really, really old bugs that need to be fixed, that are still present on their networks. And if you look at the dates of some of these CVEs, 2013, 2015, 2017. So some of these are more recent, 2021. Okay, that's valid.
Hey,
but that's critical. So like, these are a bunch of different very critical vulnerabilities that still need to be fixed. And a lot of these bugs are coming up on due dates on the 24th, actually, of this month, where they're saying if you do not have these fixed by this date, then you're out of compliance and you're going to get in trouble. So this is a binding operational directive, and they're basically saying any federal network or any federal infrastructure needs to have these things fixed by this date, or else they're going to be in trouble. Because they're so easily exploitable. It means as soon as someone gains access to the network, they can immediately begin executing attacks against these, because they've been known for such a long time and they're exploitable. So these are probably also a gathering of some of the most commonly exploited vulnerabilities just around. So by observing what types of attacks hackers are doing and what nation states are leveraging to break into systems, they've kind of developed like a hot list of all the different things that have to be fixed, because they're so easy to exploit and there's already attacks built for them. Okay, so this just sucks, and I just wanted to mention it briefly. There's a new piece of Redline Malware that's spreading as a fake Omicron stat counter. Now, I don't know how often people who use Windows just go ahead...
Download it.
Again, so this is a gamer-focused edition that just tries to install a .exe file. And like, I'm not totally sure why it's like focusing on like Discord logs and whatever, but I guess like people who like to play games also like to install .exe files that are claiming to be stat counters. I myself would not be a good target for this, because I would never run a .exe file that claimed to be like something I could Google. But I guess some people like convenience, and that's how you get caught. So it's specifically targeting people who have VPN passwords, credit card details, cryptocurrency especially. But the fact that it's focused on the most vulnerable community of all, gamers, is kind of funny, because I don't think that this attack would work against a lot of people. All right, so speaking of electric blankets that shouldn't be connected to the internet, there's an increase in different attacks of botnets that are able to route traffic from devices like this to specific targets and then demand money in order to stop the attack. And these attacks can take huge websites offline and make it super difficult for companies to be able to operate until they either pay the people who are operating the botnets or figure out some sort of way of moving their infrastructure to something that's not being attacked. But of course, then the attack can just easily be retargeted and they're back in the same position. Now, these botnets are interesting because often the people who write them are not the same people as the ones who use them. So threat actors can rent out these botnets in order to execute extortion attacks where they make money by basically renting a giant collection of maybe Electric Blanket web servers and then sending them all against a specific target. So just the fact that these are more common now is a competitor kind of to ransomware attacks, where if you can't get into someone's network, you might as well just slam it to the wall and make it so nobody can use it until someone pays you. All right, Alex, what do you got next?
I just had a pretty funny piece of news. So cyber spies infect themselves with their own malware. So it seems like some sort of Indian malware group, they had like a bunch of tools deployed for remote access tools. And they were deploying like, let me see what this is.
Yeah, so it was like, it was
Yeah.
Indian-specific hackers who were in their own environment, like testing their malware and then like having it take screenshots and like send it to their C2 servers, which were not secured. So like the threat researchers who were like looking at this, like were like, what, like, who is using this like dual purpose like Indian/English keyboard, and like why are their files in here with all of the victims?
Right.
So as I remember, it just made it like really easy for the people who are researching these attacks to find out who did it. Because as soon as they like looked at where the malware was trying to like exfiltrate data, they literally found like photos of the developers working on the malware, like from like their like screen grabs of their like screens.
Yeah, they basically just like snitched on themselves and the capabilities of their malware straight to the Pakistani Ministry of Defense. Nice.
Yeah, because that's who they were targeting. So this seems like more like state-based back and forth hacking, where like the Indian side was trying to hack the Pakistani side and then ended up just exposing themselves. So, you know, if you're gonna attack people, you should probably make sure your malware doesn't infect you too, or at least have some way of detecting it if it does. I guess their malware was just too strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, the last piece of news I have is something that our friend who works in development was messaging me about yesterday. So similar to the way that some NPM packages have been like changed or rolled back or otherwise modified, there was something that was not a malware author. It wasn't someone who like hacked into this and then used the developer to spread malware. It was the developer himself who was just tired of not being paid, who broke two incredibly important libraries that lots of people used and thus broke lots of apps that were basically profiting off of his work in some way. So kind of an ironic thing that also he was immediately suspended from GitHub, which included all of his other projects that that were also important. So this dude has basically been removed from all the projects he was working on, even though he only introduced malicious, or I would say mischievous commits that broke the code and just printed out American flags over and over.
I didn't know he was removed from GitHub.
Yeah.
That's kind of crappy.
I don't know if he's been reinstated, but like the fact that he had lots of other projects he was contributing to and then was removed for basically like breaking things that he himself created that lots of other people grew to depend on is an interesting way to note how some of these protests against people using open source projects and not contributing back to them can go wrong. Yeah.
I'm a little bit torn over that. I don't know what to think. Because like on one hand it is like free open source software, but then it's like someone's like pushing all this code out there. They deserve, I guess, some compensation. Big companies are profiting off.
Yeah, it's hard to know if the software is really yours anymore if you get removed from GitHub just for modifying something that you built.
Yeah.
That other people have decided to use. So
Right.
Pretty crazy, and a lot of people were upset about it because, you know, nobody likes to have to completely fix something in the middle of the week just because somebody pushed a malicious commit.
Right.
Okay, and that's all we have time for today. Lots of stuff that we covered, and a lot of like nation state and ransomware-based malware stuff this week. If you have anything you think that we missed, please feel free to leave a comment. And if you have any questions for us to answer on our weekly Q&A session, please make sure to either leave them here on the YouTube channel, or you can also leave them on my Twitter @CodyKinsey. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.